Here's the easy answer to secession, is that you can talk about, well, before I was going to say that, this is the point I wanted to make about us being intelligent. When you hear a suggestion made about a remedy to something, the more intelligent you are, the more steps you can see into the future that have to be hurdles that have to be crossed to get to that thing. The less intelligent you are, the fewer hurdles you can see between you and that objective. Does that make sense? The more intelligent you are, the more steps you'll see. And here I'm talking about G, the computing power of the brain. The more steps you can see, the greater the computing power. And not only that, but the interplay of dynamic forces in the crossing of those hurdles into the future. And so the further something is out, the grander the remedy, the more impossible it actually is to achieve. So if we were to say force field instead of secession, our problem is force field. Well, it's easier to see, I think, that way than it is to say secession for most people. To see, well, force field, that'd be a whole lot of science that would have to be invented to develop a force field through which air can pass, sunshine can pass, clouds can pass so that it can rain, but somehow it magically keeps out the elements we don't want into the force field. So saying secession as a response to our condition is the exact same thing as saying force field. It is a very unclear, a very unclear approach. I'm going to be as polite as possible. It is a very unclear approach. I understand where this desire comes from, this feeling of desperation, this feeling of hopelessness. I know where that comes from. That is a dark pit I've seen in too many of our people's hearts, this absolute misery. And in those, and I'll share with you something that is actually quite important about this right now, and then I'll say the question you have to have an answer for secession before you can even begin to contemplate all of the thousands of hurdles that have to be crossed into the future to make it happen, and the dynamism at play with those hurdles. Both if you wanted to try to put it into, I'll tell you the way it kind of plays out in my mind when I see this. If I have to try to explain it to you all, it's kind of, if we're going to say there are hurdles, numerous hurdles into the future, all of these other thoughts come in. I have all of these things have to be done. This has to be done, then that, then this, then that, all the way out into that answer. But then at the same time, when I think of these instantly, when I think of, okay, this hurdle has to be crossed, I think about the dynamism that can move the hurdle like this and can move the hurdle like this, can ultimately change the challenge at that moment. So you then realize that it becomes impossible. As likely, let me rephrase it like this, as likely as force field. It is as likely as force field. So let's find a physicist and we will ask how close we are to a force field, and then we'll get a response. I assure you, the physicist's eyes will go wide and they'll, my God, you have no idea how many things we have to do. But this is something that I want to mention to all of you. This is very important because this will affect all of your lives, all aspects of your life. But it's most important here because we're serving white well-being. And that's this. This is something that I just said to myself many years ago because I determined that this indeed was the case. I use it in my life regularly. It has served me well. It has served others that I have told of it well. Never wish for anything. Don't wish upon a star. Never wish for a thing. Unless it's just the simplest, like childish type of statement. It's just a throwaway statement and there's actually no meaning to it. That's one thing. But if you wish for something, here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen, a wish is actually a curse. The moment you wish for something, you have cursed yourself to never have it. Does that make sense? The moment you wish, You have just cursed yourself to never have the thing that you wished for. And don't bother saying, I wished for a new job and then I ended up having a new job. Those are called exceptions to the rule. What happens here is a function of your brain. The moment you wish for something, you have turned over your responsibility, your personal responsibility, to chance. And chance doesn't know you. Chance doesn't care about you. Chance isn't a kid on the football team. Chance is a phenomenon in human interaction, in life, that may or may not land on you in a way that is preferable or desirable. And in most cases, it does not. So the moment you wish, if you wish for that raise, you're not going to get it because you have turned over the responsibility of getting that raise to chance rather than putting it on you, taking the responsibility to do the things that are going to get you that raise. Does that make sense? So don't do that when it comes to the service to white well-being. Don't wish from that pit of despair and misery of all of this infliction of these infections on us, that you wish we could secede. You wish X, Y, or Z. Don't you ever wish. The moment you start wishing, you better stop yourself and begin saying, what can I do to serve white well-being and bring about that day when we recapture our destiny? And then we can argue over stupid things like what county or what state are you going to be able to smoke marijuana in? All right? So that is extremely important. And if you all, make sure you do this. If you implement this in your life, you're the student right now, like the honorable student who just gave us $5, or the one who's going to go back to school. I think it was for chemistry. If you implement this, you say to yourself, for example, I wish I had an A in this course, or I wish, and that used to be something that you would say, and you decide to get rid of that curse and make it happen, come back to us. Let us know. I promise. If you are like all of these other people that I have shared this with, and God, I wish I had been shared, that had been shared with me when I was a child. I had to figure all these things out when I became an adult. Once so much time had already gone by, what could I be doing now for our people if these sorts of things had been shared with me instead of me having to figure them out? So I'm sharing them with you. Share them with your children. You might have the next daughter or son who's going to have a 120, 130, 150 IQ, or how about this, 100 IQ, but just amazingly industrious, heart as big as a Volvo, and is going to make things happen no matter what his or her innate capabilities. That's what's important. You tell them that, you unleash them now, you protect them from the mean pathogens, and you watch what happens for the well-being of our people. So here's the thing that you have to understand about secession. The moment you can defeat the United States government at war, you can secede. Period. No other questions. No other buts. Shut up if you have a but. The moment you can defeat the United States government and every other government that is dominated by the anti-white elites, which means all of the governments of the West and virtually all of the other governments of the world, the moment you can defeat them all at warfare, then you can begin to plot secession. There is no use in thinking about seceding because no anti-white anywhere is going to prevent or is going to permit a group of white people to say in argument, let us just cleave off this little bit here. So it's going to have to be hostile, which means it's going to have to be warfare. So you are going to have to be able to defeat. If you cannot tell me how you're going to defeat the United States, Great Britain, Germany, France, Canada, Mexico, any country that the anti-white elites could bring to bear against you, if you can't tell me how you're going to defeat them in warfare, then shut up and go home. This is a dumb argument, and it's been made by, well, let me just say, it's not a lucid argument. It's not a rational argument. It is an irrational argument. It is an irrational position. Let me see here what a couple of the points I wanted to make. I jotted some quick notes down, but really that's the end of discussion. The discussion is extremely wistful in its nature. For example, citing bad demographic numbers citing bad demographic numbers is a supportive point for one's wish that we could secede. It is not a supportive point for the possibility or applicability or even appropriateness of secession. Okay, does that make sense? You can't say demographics are bad, so therefore that's a point for the applicability or the achievability of secession. No, it is a point that supports your wish that we could secede, but is not a point that we could secede or even that it would be appropriate. How appropriate would it be? Even if by some quirk of magic, we could cleave off some area and somehow magically we could defend it with arms against the United States government. How smart would that be to cleave off some corner here or there when they would just radiate the totality of the landmass? Even if you could somehow, in basic warfare with tanks and jets and machine guns and mortars and RPGs or laws in America, all of these weapons, Humvees, M1, A2, Apache helicopters, if you had all of this and somehow you could bring the United States and all of the rest of the military of the world to a standstill and occupy some corner of land, they would just press a button and we all would be gone. That is what would happen. Now, there have been intelligent people, very intelligent, educated people like Dr. Hill, who have talked about secession for a long time. You take the group of people in the South, in the Southland. I'm a proud Southerner from Virginia. You take a group of people who identifies as a group of people who has a shared history, a shared persecution, even. In those environments, educated and intelligent people like Dr. Hill were talking about secession as a move on the chessboard for conversation purposes, for argumentative purposes. Yes, if he could have his druthers, he would have secession, he would have the South secede again. But ultimately, when intelligent, educated people like Dr. Hill, and whether or not, in those halcyon days of being out front and leading the marches he led and the arguments and the conferences he had, when he talked about secession, he was moving a chess piece. It was a gambit on the board that said, I'm talking about secession, and here's the reason why. And then there's a list. So it was an argumentative tactic because we have different peoples, because we want different outcomes, because these lives are being ruined by X, Y, or Z. Does that make sense? So there wasn't an insane idea that you could somehow talk anti-whites out of what they already possess and have them give it over to people who are heretics, have them turn it over to heretics. And there was no insane belief that you could fight it away from them, that you were somehow going to wage war on the United States. So that was what was going on with intelligent people, educated people like Dr. Hill when they talked about secession. Yes, if he had his druthers, it would be secession. But in reality, what do we have here in this context for the day? You have an argumentative gambit that opens the door to talk about a bunch of other things when you are talking with prospective converts to that line of thinking, when you are talking to anti-white reporters and the like. Now, we can talk about actual secession, can't we? Because there was a secession in the United States. And how did it happen? Well, it happened because you had a unified people in the Southland who saw themselves, an entire people who saw themselves as distinct from the rest of the country, very distinct. They saw themselves as, look, we are Southerners. We do things a certain way. We are very different from our brothers in the North when they were still all together in the United States, still joined in that union, which was supposed to be a union of choice that they could leave, that they still saw themselves as very different people. And more importantly, they identified themselves as white, as a people, as white people with a specific, identifiable, distinct, discrete culture with distinct governments for their countries that were called states. Each one of those states was its own country, just like we call the state of Iraq or the state. Those were all their own countries. And the citizenry of those states were loyal to the governments of authoritative bodies for those people. Remember the importance of authority to white people. Those were the authoritative bodies. Now, we can't go into why they seceded. Maybe we could do that on D Live sometime, but we can't do it here on YouTube. But they end up seceding. They seceded with their loyalty to our white people, our distinct culture as Southerners, and specifically to the authority of their governments of their country, which were their states. And then those individual countries, those individual states, became a union in the Confederate States of America, just like they had in the United States of America. That was a giant landmass composed of a unified people who had the absolute conviction of righteousness and faith and loyalty in authoritative bodies, not a deracinated mass of white people who, the most of whom are terrorized of being or saying anything heretical, who believe deep down that they're demonic and immoral for caring about our white children, for stopping the harm that's being inflicted on our white babies. We have a sick population around the world now that has to be healed. Not a group of people that we can convince this is the legitimate authorities, and you should go with us into this idea of secession. And what happened? They were not able to defeat the United States at war. That's what happened. What happened, ladies and gentlemen? I have some numbers I jotted down. Let me tell you, when the United States government was composed of white people with some anti-white influence, but nothing like today, when it was composed of people who had cousins and uncles and brothers or sisters who lived in the South. What about Abe Lincoln's wife and her family and where they were from and who they were loyal to? These were people who, running this government, who were our very own kind. And we can look to examples out this throughout history. They were willing to murder to prevent secession. They were willing to murder roughly 700,000 combatants. 700,000. When you include the deaths of civilians, we're talking about over 1 million people they were willing to exterminate to prevent secession. It gets worse. The country had roughly 30 million people at that time. Let me say the country. The United States and the Confederate States together had roughly 30 million people. And they were willing to murder 1 million of them to prevent secession. That was legal. It was legal to withdraw from that union. The documents, the ink was still wet. It was so legal to withdraw. And they were still willing to murder 1 million plus people to prevent secession. So there were roughly 30 million then. There are roughly 300 million, a little over 300 million now. If we were to balance the numbers out, that would be roughly around 12 million that they would be willing to murder to prevent secession. And that would be if the government was controlled by our brothers, fellow white people who had feelings for us, who had relatives living amongst us. You have something very different running the show in the federal governments of the West now. How many more? I don't think there would be any number that they wouldn't be willing to murder to prevent from losing power. 12 million, 50 million, 100 million, they'd be willing to murder to prevent from losing control. And you're going to talk about, some folks are going to talk about secession, a very short-sighted, very myopic. But here's what I'm going to do. For anybody out there who wants to advance the idea of secession, I'm going to put the burden on you where it belongs, not on people like me. The burden belongs on you. For those who want to advance secession, the burden belongs on you. You have to demonstrate proof of concept. One of the first things that you're going to have to do if you want to be able to secede is move masses of people to a particular area. So let you prove your concept with moving, say, 50,000. You're going to need a great many dozens of millions to be able to wage this war. We're not even getting into the whole, how do you get the armaments? How do you get all, you're going to need a great many millions. So let's see you move 50,000 to a particular area and give us proof of concept. You know what I bet? I bet you're not going to be able to move 50,000. I bet you're not even going to be able to move 50 people to a new area. The burden is on you. You won't have proof of concept if you get 50 people to move to a specific town somewhere or a specific county somewhere. But you will have at least been moving in some sort of direction other than just complaining. So let's see you move at least 50 to a new area. Here's the problem when it comes to moving folks to an area, ladies and gentlemen. Just picking up stakes and moving. We now live in an extraordinarily specialized society where we are hyper specialized and educated and trained on a specific thing, the vast majority of us. And we are basically imbecilic when it comes to everything else because the human animal can only hold so much in its head. So people live where they live because they live where they work. And not everyone, not every line of work out there is a line of work that a person can say, well, I could just pick it up and do it anywhere. In the past, when everybody was a farmer or everybody did X, Y, or Z that was on the land and you could do that anywhere you went or something analogous, it would be much easier. Like the Mormons picked up a bunch of people and they just moved on. You couldn't do that today with the same numbers, with the same momentum, with the same outcome. And for anybody out there who might object, what about the folks who work online? First of all, that jobs that are done just online, tiny percentage of overall jobs out there. So you've radically reduced the number of people who can participate. And then you're going to move out to some small town, and what's going to happen there? They're just going to shut off the internet to the town. They're going to disrupt it. It could be anything from some balaclava wearing scumbags going out and hacking through the cables somewhere, all the way up to cable companies deciding that since you're heretical, they're not going to provide service to that area anymore. So the burden is on you. If you think that you could effectuate secession somewhere, let's see you just get 50 people to move someplace. And if you can't, shut up. So I'm going to take a look at the questions and comments that have been made, and then I'm going to get to my final statements and why we decided to have this conversation here after PWR, despite driving through the night and everything else I've been doing. I want to make sure we get everybody's questions and comments, make sure that any misunderstandings or confusion is resolved. Let me ask, has anybody attempted to super chat by way of the familiar alternative? I will just ask that. I'll go from the bottom up. Big at Smalls. What if we move back to Europe? You're black pilling. No, I'm absolutely. It's only black pilling if you have a delusion that that is the route to success. That is not the route to success. Does that make sense? If the house is on fire and you say that, well, let's put it out with these squirt guns we have. And I say, oh, that's not going to work. You're never going to put all this fire out with your squirt gun. And you then say to me, well, this is blackpilling. We can't put this fire out. No, it's because you're focused on the squirt gun. There are ways to put this fire out. But if you focus on the squirt gun, then there isn't going to be any success. So there is a route, and we talk about it here all of the time, and we're doing it right now. In fact, we are treating the infections that we all have with this curative contagion that is spreading, as you all can see, like wildfire. What we have to do today, ladies and gentlemen, and some of you have heard this before, some of you may be hearing it for the first time. If it's live and you're hearing it for the first time, you don't quite get it, chime in. If it is in replay, please feel free to ask in the thread. But what we are doing with this curative contagion is we have to shift the context of where we are today to a new context. Now, that can take longer or that can be shorter. It depends on us, how hard we work. It depends also on some things going on outside of us and how we react and respond to those things. Rest assured, we have the intelligence now to make the best decisions irrespective of what's going on outside of us. But we have to be working hard as hell right now to spread this curative contagion. Because by spreading this curative contagion, giving people the right way to think about themselves, our identity, understand the anti-white world, we will shift the context from where it is today to where it can be. And in a new context, which we can't predict what that will look like. No human being can, no computer can. You cannot model human ingenuity. In that new context, there will be new opportunities. And in that new context, those opportunities might open up a path to us that is quite rapid and totally invisible to us today. So if anything, you should be absolutely ecstatic that there is an opportunity to move where we are to someplace new, where there might be a door that takes us to our destiny and in the time scale of things overnight. Now, we might get to that next context, and there'll be opportunities that will enable us to go a little further, take us to a new context where new opportunities will be presented to us. Fewer and worse things, fewer opportunities presented to the anti-whites in those contexts. Perhaps in those contexts, anti-whites begin making enormous errors in strategy, which would then change things again. The problem is that, and I've talked about this before, when it comes to examining the playing field here, is that if you look at the playing field, if you look at the way things are, and you say, this is how things are for all time, any strategy that you come up in that on that playing field, in that context, is doomed to failure because nothing stays static. Nothing is going to stay the same. In the course of your life, it may seem like things change very little, but it might be because there are not people like us who are shifting the context to something brand new. So we work with the context that we have with the intent of moving it to a new place where we will have opportunities invisible to us today. That should be extremely white pilling, because that, my friends, is a hell of a lot easier than fighting off the United States government. Because let me tell you something, you're never going to get to the point where you get to fight a war against the United States government. You know, all I was talking about, all of these hurdles along the way, the many thousands of hurdles that you would have to cross between. This is what's blackpilling. Who was it? Bigot Smalls that asked this. This is what's blackpilling. When you say, I have this wish for secession, and then I look out over the distance between here and there, and I see thousands of hurdles I have to cross, all of which are in perpetual motion, as everything is dynamic in human interaction, dynamic in the environment itself, could change things radically and have a contextual change that would give us new opportunities. You just don't know. But here's the thing. You would never get over all of those hurdles, even if you could somehow, which is not possible. But even if we just theorized that it's done for argument's sake, you still couldn't get there, because you know it's going to be done in the United States, and they're going to be applicable or similar laws in other Western countries. You are immediately going to be charged with sedition. You're going to be tried in a private court. No one's going to even get to know that you're being tried. If you're allowed to have an attorney, and they've already done this in the United States, if you are allowed to have an attorney, the attorney is not allowed to defend you. The attorney is only allowed to observe. And then you're going to go to jail forever, and no one will see you again. So if you got not 50,000, but say you got 500 people to move to an area with the open intent to secede, they're not going to, the government of the United States is not going to allow that to get any bigger. I can guarantee that. They're going to come in there and they're going to Ruby Ridge your ass. They're going to Waco your ass. And those who don't fight back and get murdered by the anti-whites are going to be tried with sedition, and no one will ever see you again. It might not even get to that point with as fanatical as the anti-whites are now. If you are openly talking about secession, you are going to go to jail for life. So what do I say? What are we offering here? Well, I just said we have to treat the psychology of our injuries, which is the anti-white infection. We have to spread that treatment, that curative contagion, to our brothers and sisters. By spreading it as rapidly as we can, and it spreads very easily, we present a force to help push against the context, to push it in a new direction. There are going to be other factors playing in there as well, ladies and gentlemen. And we will take advantage of those opportunities when they're presented to us. Yes, where you can, move to an environment where you can be close with others who are going free, rear your children in going free, do that sort of thing. Be normal white families like all of the other white families around you, because you want the whole community to eventually join in, the whole subdivision to eventually start going free. Be normal like them, have a regular job, rear your children in service to white well-being, dress what is normal for your economic status, for the job that you do that is normal for your community. Share this truth and this blessing and this hope with them. And don't be in one place so that you can be Ruby Ridged out of existence or Waco'd out of existence. Be everywhere. Have those little towns, have those little communities everywhere. Obviously, not in the intercities where it is rabidly anti-white and in many cases anti-white and non-white. But it really doesn't matter, because if they're white anti-whites, they're still going to come after you. Maybe even worse. Get your family into someplace safe where you can work, you can live, you can rear them in love and blessing and hope for our people. Put your shoulder behind this curative contagion, and let's move this context. We only have a certain amount of time before we reach that event horizon. And it might even come quicker than we think. But we know that event horizon is approaching, which we've talked about. That is where the anti-whites begin to look at of the various groups that compose anti-whiteism, begin to look at each other as the real competitor for their well-being and individual well-being and enrichment, rather than us. That is our window for opportunity. We better be there, and you better be working your ass off along with me and everybody else who has been dedicating themselves to this, to make sure that we are ready when that time comes, to make sure that we have a united people, that we can act as a group, that we can present ourselves to the totality of our race as an authority to them, which they need to be able to follow. If there isn't that authority structure, they're not going to heed anything we say. That's what we need to be doing now. And once we get to that place, As I said, everybody's going to say then, well, obviously that was the way to go. No shit. But now we have everybody who wants to just say, not sure if that may, nobody's done that before. I know nobody has done it before. They've never been in a situation like this before. This is what we have to do. It works. Other secessionist movements have failed. Other movements, like we'll talk about tonight, like this, the Groypers, where some of them are wanting it to be a Catholic thing, have failed. We cannot break ourselves up into sects, and we cannot pursue an objective that has already demonstrated to rivers of seas and oceans of blood ideas that have failed. So let me see. So Bigot Smalls, brother, you should feel absolutely ecstatic that we have this opportunity, that we have time. Because I'm going to tell you what, there can be natural disasters, there can be calamities, there can be a lot of things that could radically change the context, and we better be ready. No one, let me tell you what, no nationalist group that exists now is going to suddenly be white positive tomorrow if, who knows what happens, an asteroid hits, or who knows what kind of calamity could happen. A solar flare that disrupts the magnetic sphere, the geomagnetic sphere around the world, and throws everything into haywire. You better believe that those nationalist groups, especially here in the U.S., are going to show up. If they're going to rebel, they're going to show up with their multiracial crew sitting on top of the tank, saying it's all about the ideas. So we better get to them quick. You better start spreading this curative contagion, because the opportunities are coming, and we have to be ready to take advantage. That is what's white pilling. You now have something you can actually do. You can now get off your ass or stay on your ass and type all day long to people on the internet about this curative contagion, or get out and pass out leaflets, get out and fund content creators, get out and put your intelligence behind what we are doing. There are things we can do to build up where we need to be so that we are ready when the moment hits, because the moment is coming one way or another. And we are either going to be able to take advantage of that opportunity or not. I'll tell you this, and then we'll get to the rest of the comments. I had a belief that helped to, I had a lot of natural talent as an athlete. I was extremely fast. I was very strong for my size. I had a extremely high vertical leap. But the thing that made me a star athlete, which is no brag, just fact, the thing that made me a star athlete was that I was haunted by the reality that somewhere out there in the future, there was going to be a moment where I was going to come up against some other guy who is also training to be the best athlete he can be. And there's going to be a moment when the window is open for me and I'm going to be in competition with him. Am I going to be the one who has worked the hardest for that day? Because if I'm not, he's going to beat me that day. Whoever he is. And I faced him again and again and again in baseball and football primarily, basketball more when I was a youth, but in baseball and football primarily. And again, I won. Because when I thought about him out there working, is he out running in the rain? Is he running the next 100 meters and puking all over himself? Is he going to climb another set of bleachers? Is he? Because if he is, I've got to do one more. I've got to do one more set. I've got to try a little bit harder. And because of that, I won. Because of that mentality, we are going to win. The anti-whites are out there training right now. They've got their money. They've got their goons. They've got their plans. We have to be training as well. You better do one more. You better be willing to do one more set of bleachers. You better be willing to do one more 100-meter dash. Because if you're not, when that moment comes, and it's coming, we're going to lose our ass. And there's no wish in the world that's going to save it.